Tell us about Doha. And there's a lot going on in Doha with this big forum right now and film festivals. What was
It was
happening?
it was deeply moving. Fatma, who is the head of the Doha Film Festival and Doha Film Fund, is a lion-hearted woman who can see the power of connecting the cultural power of the continent of Africa with the Arab nations in a way that I've never seen before. And I was there for a week, and to see the amount, if we just focus on the Sudanese films and programming and the investment for years into Sudanese filmmakers, I was just confused because I'm so used to, a lot of the performative levels of interest that we have in the British film industry, in the UK side of things. This was something else. This was long-term helping people become storytellers and then screening their films, whether it's short films or feature films and or documentaries. I've never seen that at a film festival anywhere in the world, and it's something they really should be commended for.
And, Qatar has been investing in cultural capital in the African continent for a minute. And I think it was 2023. I was there with Naomi Campbell, who had launched a fund to support African designers. And Qatar really put a lot of money into creating a space to showcase African designers, to create some kind of infrastructure to raise a generation of African design talent. And the reality is something similar has been happening with fine art, as you say, with film.
Mm.
There are very few global powers with resources that have put their money where their mouth is in terms of supporting African storytelling in that way. Just going to be a cynic for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
There is also a power dynamic at work here because Qatar, and as we know through Al Jazeera and all of these spaces and institutions it's been creating for art, is asserting itself as a global region, as a global powerhouse for the Middle East vis-a-vis its adversaries, especially Saudi and UAE. And so it feels as if this is also like posturing for influence, announcing to the world, like, we are a powerhouse, we are a player. So I'm curious, like, how much do you think we should embrace that as people who have no skin in that specific game, but see what's at work, and speaking for myself, I'm a little conflicted because on the one hand, I'm pushing at the open doors, and as we're seeing Europe and America lean more into this native nationalism that's hostile to social justice, hostile to equities, hostile to us telling our voices that don't center whiteness, you kind of want to go where the doors are open, go where there is a willingness to do things differently. On the other hand, I guess one thing that we should all be weary of as people descended of African heritage is the way that our capital gets used by others who are competing for global power. That's basically what happened to Africa during the Cold War. That was colonialism, kind of extracting our storytelling and our voices for something that's fundamentally not about us, that could ultimately be just as detrimental to us as previous power struggles. Am I overthinking it, Misan?
Well, I think from my experience, I just haven't seen that. The Sudanese men and women that I met are being empowered in a way that feels really genuine. And I was actually, again, I always talk about crying, but they didn't see this, but I was in tears when after one of they had a Sudanese night, and everyone was back at the hotel, and the emotion and just seeing people that have seen too much be in a place where they feel that their stories are not just seen but are supported was something that actually I think a big chunk of the film, TV, entertainment industry should learn from. I'm quite, my spider senses for when people are being used is pretty high. This seemed different, and it's not necessarily just nation states. It's about the individuals that run different segments of it. And I've been really impressed by everyone that I've met. And, even how they see me and my voice, and, through a very decolonized, unapologetic lens. I'm not an easy person to, I have quite strong views with the future of what film and TV should be. And I think Qatar is the first major player that is stepping into that place, Should Nigeria be doing it itself? Of course. Should India be doing it itself? Of course. But this is the first major player that has the resources to be able to do it. And we talk about Pan-Africanism, but this is something else. I think if multiple regions connect, understanding the power they have to shape culture with the support of a studio system, development of up and coming talent, it will completely change the axis of the European American absolute dominion on how and what culture is. And one thing's for sure, there is an audience for it. So let's see, in many ways it is an arms race for the hearts and souls of a new world.
But it's also not just about money as well. I mean, there's a lot we can learn from history. I always think about how during the era of African independence, Senegal, Leopold Senghor, who was the independence leader, first prime minister of Senegal, first president, allocated 25% of the national budget for the arts. And you think about a country like Britain, which is kind of in a frenzy of slashing its funding for arts, for independent film, art, theatre, all kinds of storytelling. It's not just about the wealth at your disposal. It's about the intentionality of understanding that culture and art is an investment in future generations, is a strategic play for your position on the world stage. And it's interesting watching the former colonial nations kind of forget how they use the arts as propaganda to establish themselves in the first place. Now they're in long-term decline. And, you've got to give credit where credit's due to countries that understand that and are willing to put the money into supporting the artists and storytellers, because it will pay off for them. And I think Qatar is such an interesting example of that. Like, Qatar has arrived not just as, the kind of natural gas, petrodollar Middle Eastern state, but as a place that is really earning the respect and affection of people who tell stories, and stories that others are not supporting, stories about what's happening in Sudan, stories about what's happening in Congo, stories about what's happening in Palestine, stories about blackness and black identity and heritage. So yes, as you say, we want to see our African nations.
Yeah, but
that.
just to add to that, I mean, you mentioned Al Jazeera. I think so much has changed. So much has changed in the last 2 years, because there was a very preconceived view from a Western lens of what Al Jazeera is. And a lot of people that would never go onto that channel would say, oh, it's just a propaganda news station. Many people now. I would love to look at the data of how many new regular watchers of Al Jazeera News. And I think
it's deeper than that, Misan, because when, I teach journalism in America, and, when I first started teaching journalism in America, I teach international reporting. So part of my syllabus is that it is mandatory that my students, the majority of whom are American, must engage in international news platforms. That doesn't mean CNN International. It means news platforms that are based in other countries that have a different lens. Even the BBC is like a diversification if you're American. And one of the major platforms that I insisted they engage with was Al Jazeera. And it was so interesting because their perception post 9/11 was that this is kind of completely like off the grid, that it was like really radical, that it's maybe dabbling in some kind of like Islamic fundamentalist, the prejudice and ignorance was so astonishing. Even, and I know that Al Jazeera has had it, there's been suspicion around it here, but that's nothing compared to the complete pariah status it occupied in America. And that has completely changed within 3 years. I think, now my students are asking me for contacts to see if they can get jobs at Al Jazeera.
Jobs at Al Jazeera.
No, literally, that's where they want to work.
Yeah.
It's night and day.
But also the headlines, I think, News Corp, which has come out in the last year, and they run AI to see comparing headlines across the whole planet. And Al Jazeera has been the benchmark on, the language that is used and the language that isn't used. So they've compared hundreds of BBC headlines, whether it's about Ukraine, whether it's about Palestine. And interestingly, Al Jazeera actually used the same language when talking about what happened in Ukraine and Palestine. And yet the BBC, I mean, we all know this, but it is one day it will have to be in a museum the reductive and frankly dangerous language used specifically in headlines, from calling Hin Rajab, may she rest in peace, a young woman. It's
I
wild.
saw a headline, I can't remember if it was BBC, but it was one major British news outlet this week saying the killing of 2 children by the IDF is the latest test of the ceasefire. And it's like, killing children is not a test. It's a war crime. It's so just that kind of casual usage, and it's the context in which it's used that there's just no connection with the humanity of the people that you're describing.
A
It's
Jewish
so
newspaper,
it's become
Haaretz,
normalized.
Al Jazeera and Haaretz have been
Haaretz
more.
is incredible. Haaretz has been incredible
They have been
throughout
more
this.
honest. This is amazing to me to think about it. Al Jazeera and Haaretz have been they've done actual journalism
But
over the last 2 years.
Haaretz is hated by many in Israel, and it's interesting how it's gained so much credibility on the world stage for being an Israeli news outlet that is interested in holding Israel accountable,
Mm.
which is what news outlets are supposed to do, by the way. That's literally our job as journalists. But anyway, that's now a kind of remarkable accomplishment. And it's so interesting how polarizing it is for a news organization to do what a news organization is supposed to do, because people have become used to the kind of propaganda that feeds into what they want to hear.
We have a lot to talk about, and I know we should move on from this, but as someone that has written so many brilliant articles, what we've fallen so far now, and I saw Owen Jones calling out Melanie Phillips last week, and it became a huge story because of, her statements were.
I don't engage with
They were
Melanie.
it was out of this world. But what was it more interesting? I'm not going to really focus on what she said. It was horrific, but it's the fact that she still writes for the Times. She's still writes for the Spectator, and she is still regularly invited onto Question Time. And I think the bigger question, that people in England that work within the apparatus of TV is asking ourselves how this is possible. Because
She is an extremist. There's no other name for it. Her voice has no place in a democratic society that observes the rule of law. It's wild. The only thing I will add is that, Melanie Phillips started her career at The Guardian. Did you know that? She used to be a very lefty, in fact, even, and this is before my time at The Guardian, but colleagues told me that even by standards of The Guardian, she was on the left.
What happened?
Something happened to Melanie Phillips. If anyone who's watching can tell us the story of what turned Melanie Phillips from Guardian voice into one of the most rabidly hateful bigots of our media landscape, I am here to know. I have some other stories about Melanie Phillips and family members. Maybe I'll share those. Personal stories. I'll share those.
Damn. Okay, I didn't know you knew that much. Afua.
I'll share those another day. Let's talk about the Met Ball, because you wanted to talk about this. I mean, it's part of let's call it an Amazon package. It's an Amazon package that you're receiving today.
Yeah.
The thing that really made me laugh, so Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez taking over the Met Ball.
Yeah.
The thing that really made me laugh was some commentary I was reading that was describing.
For 1 second, sorry, 1 second.
Oh, is it your dog? This is real, guys. It's not staged. I was actually just thinking how awkward it would be if my doorbell rang right now with an actual Amazon package. So I'm glad it's Miss Anne who's had the interruption, not me.
Sorry. Right.
So the Met Ball, somebody said this is going to destroy the authenticity of the Met Ball. And I was like, what authenticity? I'm so confused. I get it. But I just thought it was interesting, the idea that the Met Ball was some kind of hub of authentic, I don't know what self-expression, celebration of culture. Like the Met Ball is a place where you spend whatever, $20, $100, $200,000 a table and invite people who are rich and famous to be at your table. Like, it's not, for me, it's not some kind of platform for the resistance or some expression of struggle or some bastion of like radical or even original ideas. It's a place where famous people that you follow wear sometimes interesting outfits. And, it's like reading Vogue. You get to see who's doing what and who's on Ozempic and who's going out with who and who wore something really interesting this year. But I wouldn't describe it as kind of like one of our precious cultural institutions that tell some kind of truth about who we are.
Well,
Am
I
I
mean,
overlooking something?
they will. I mean, they'll try and co-opt it. I mean, last year, what did they try and do? Right, black dandyism. So
Yeah, that was a mistake.
what?
Yeah, I don't think Anna Wintour has earned the stripes to take on black dandyism.
Not
That's
at
a bit of
all.
an understatement, actually.
Mm.
But some people that I rate showed up and did their best to tell a story about Black culture and the ways in which Black people have been innovating and creating fashion for generations. That's cool, but
Mm.
I just I can't. I am more allergic than anyone to billionaires buying precious cultural institutions. I just don't think the Met Ball is necessarily the one I'm going to mourn.
No, I don't think it's been relevant for a while. I think they are trying to find ways to be relevant. And, you know, I made a post not that long ago after Bezos got married and got a Vogue cover. And I
That
was
was
ready.
not Vogue's finest moment,
No,
was
but
it?
it's a reflection of where we are at.
Oh, I remember your post. It was comparing your Vogue cover, which was
Mm-hmm.
genuinely game changing for centering protests, Black Lives Matter, and a ground level movement,
Mm-hmm.
which is one of the things that Edward Enninful did that I think we can all agree should
Mm-hmm.
be remembered, versus, what was it, 3 years later, 4 years later,
5 years later, we
five
get
years later?
yeah. We this and we've fallen far. We have a billionaire able to buy a Vogue cover for himself and his new bride, his new wife, and we are being told to accept that this is a culture that we should aspire to. And now he is doing the same thing with the Met Ball. And if you look at images of Jeff in his youth as he was coming up, I'm all for the glow up, but you need to ask yourself, what this man is trying to do with his almost endless wealth, and maybe some of it is his wife wanting to be in the rooms that they were never allowed in, but they have the kind of money that can literally make the world a better place. Instead, they are investing in things that are shiny for their own sense of self, I would say. And when you see what Amazon and data centers is doing to very vulnerable communities, when you see the multiple genocides going on in the world and a handful of men, including Jeff, owning the media landscape, you kind of, this, you're right. This is like the shiny part and the least important part of looking at the extreme influence of the oligarchy.
It's one of the things that, The Guardian is not perfect,
Mhm.
and I've never thought it was perfect. But one of the things that I appreciate about The Guardian and that I made me want to work there was that it's so rare as a newspaper that is not owned by a billionaire,
Mhm.
owned by a trust. The concept of it being owned in trust is in its DNA. And I remember thinking, like, what would it be like to be a journalist at a news outlet that is owned by somebody who can dictate the agenda? And, a smart media owner stays in the background
Mhm.
and doesn't interfere overtly or even covertly with editorial stance because it removes the legitimacy of the news outlet and destroys the brand, right? So that would be like the reason that Sky News, also flawed, but is taken seriously as an independent news outlet is because even when Murdoch owned a majority stake, there was like uh at least the appearance and actually the reality of a protection between editorial decision making and Murdoch actually calling shots. Where owners influence output in a different way because people who work within the organization start kind of internalizing what they think the owner is going to want to see. But for Bezos to actually intervene in the Washington Post, which he bought after the election, and say, we're not going to criticize this anymore, we're not going to weigh into kind of MAGA stuff, and that feels cold. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it basically read as, we're not going to go here, guys. There are certain areas that are off limits. And it was, I can't remember the details, but the Washington Post hemorrhaged
Mhm.
subscribers
Mhm.
immediately. And it takes decades and sometimes centuries to build up trust. the entire mainstream media is losing that kind of trust now. But it's just so self-defeating, apart from anything else, to destroy it so obviously. And of course, there's Karen Attier, who we both love, the incredible,
Love her.
only Black woman senior columnist at the Washington Post, who lost her job because of her relentless calling out the truth on issues from the Middle East to MAGA to what's happening in Africa.
Yeah, doing her job.
Again, that is the job. So, yes, Bezos and data centers. So, yeah, one of the many nefarious things about the Amazon empire, and it's becoming, I think, more obvious now. And I think we're all grappling with this. That, I was saying to a friend of mine the other day, who's kind of obsessed with ChatGPT, do you know how much fresh drinking water every single prompt is using up from the plan? And it was so interesting. Like, it hadn't occurred to her. It wasn't that she was like, yeah, I did a cost benefit analysis, I
Yeah.
need the service. It was just like, she didn't know. She didn't connect AI with water. And I think a lot of people are only now coming around to the reality that the environmental cost of this technology and of these giants who are expanding. And it's just like classic capitalism. It's like gold or oil or land grabs in colonialism, where these kind of white men, pioneers, are willing to do whatever it takes, whether it's genocide, whether it's environmental collapse, to get the land, consolidate the power, create the profit. I mean, that is capitalism. That's what capitalism rewards. The only thing that can restrain that is rules and regulations that mean certain things are off limits. The problem with Amazon is it's now so rich that it basically has more money than any
most nation states. Yeah,
most nation states than any political campaign could ever have. Like, there's nothing that is strong
no.
or powerful enough to counter its
Well,
influence. How can a
apart
democracy
from us.
keep corporations in check? Right. So that's why it's good that we're finally waking up
Yeah.
to data centers. So the story I think that was this week was about how communities who live near data centers, which are proliferating at like an insane rate, are experiencing rare cancers, miscarriages, all kinds of rare and disproportionate diseases that scientists now think are linked to the effluents in the drinking water.
Yeah,
and
the
in
nitrates
the
in the water.
nitrates, and that those nitrates are now being drawn back by the data centers so that they're evaporating and becoming concentrated. And so you're getting this concentration of these dangerous toxins in the water that people are consuming, in the air that people are breathing. And it's really complicated, Misan, as well, because there's like a geopolitical dynamic, right, where in the future, the countries that are going to have a critical advantage are the ones that have that capacity, that have data centers, that have AI power. They call it compute power. So, of course, the global south and the global north, it's going to be the usual pattern. And it's currently America, Europe, China that have the power to compete on a global scale with that kind of compute power versus the rest of the world that doesn't. So there's that domination. But even within countries like America that have that compute power, of course, where are they building the data centers? They're building them in lower income, disproportionately Black and other minoritized communities where they feel they can get away with polluting the drinking water. This is like a very well-tested playbook.
Yeah.
And so it's just a new iteration of an old problem, but it's really, really disturbing.
Echoes of Flint. There's one of the pictures in the gallery where my show is. It says, systemic change for collective liberation. And I think a lot of people are beginning to, your friend that uses Chat GTP without realizing, that data centers need to be cooled, and to cool a data center, there is no version of doing it that doesn't hurt Mother Earth. And I think people are beginning, just like people are beginning to realize that every September when they get a new iPhone, the mines in Congo, are harming young people, young Black men in general. Just like the people that have been buying, all sorts of fast fashion are looking at that value chain in a different way. And I think, we're in a really interesting time where we all need to ask ourselves if we are the last outpost. And I said this in a talk not long ago, that I believe we are. I don't think there is any other protective layer. The rules-based order, whether it's Israel or whether it's oligarchy living in a post-truth and utterly in utter impunity in how they move in terms of international and national law. we have to fight it with the only thing that we have, and that's the consumer power, which is why BDS has been so important. It's really, really, really important that we organize at a global scale. One of the things we can do that is the gift of the internet is realize that, we can be a collective voice in terms of consumer, buying power or not buying power. And I've read about this a lot. And the more I realize that that's what the only language that is going to be listened to by these kind of, they're not even companies anymore. If you look at what Larry Ellison's doing with the acquisition of Paramount, and now he's heading for Warner's, and then where Oracle lives in our lives. If you look at what Planeteer is doing, we are in real trouble. And I don't want to have people watching this thinking like we are in some sort of end of days scenario.
Mhm.
But it's getting Orwellian, and it's getting Orwellian fast. This data center in Oregon was just 10,000 square foot. That's small. There are giant data centers that are polluting our world. And, I always ask people, could you live in a world without AI? And what I mean by AI is, the large language model, proper machine learning, because AI has been in our lives when, it's just been they use a different term. Like Google search was a form of machine learning, right? So it's been in the internet of our lives for a long time, but this new level of computing power where they're scraping your writing, Afua, right? Sally Rooney's
Please
writing,
don't
right?
get me started.
Um,
I
uh,
looked at how many of my books have been stolen. It's really the only word for it because they're not paying a license. They're not asking
mm,
permission
mm,
by large language models for training, and all of them basically.
mhm,
So yeah, and I have, I think, about 2,000 articles that I've published in my lifetime that are mostly for the Guardian, so free to view, not behind a paywall.
mhm, mhm,
And as a result, if you ask any of the big chatbots to write an article in my voice on
mhm.
basically anything,
They will just,
they
yeah.
can. I mean, it's not me, but
No.
it's close enough to freak me out. And that's actually one reason I love Substack, because
Yes.
the pieces I write for Substack, you have to subscribe to read. And it's not our lovely followers just because I want your money, although I do think, like, if you value something, paying for it is a powerful thing to do. It's also because I don't want them to be scraping my writing,
Mm. And
and it protects us.
we have to ask ourselves, and I do this at dinner parties and WhatsApp groups all the time. It's like, do we need AI? Like, what was your life like 3 years ago before you were using Chat GTP? I don't use it. Like, I have, some stuff for my dyslexia that helps me, but that's really basic.
Don't
But
get me started, my fan. I've written about 5 pieces ranting about how
well, no, but
I-
people need to ask themselves, because relative to what it's going to do to the planet, right? And what it's going to do to our lives, I don't think it's going to improve our lives in
Yeah, but it's
any
one of these
meaningful way.
things like weapons, and which, by the way, is a major area. And a lot of the stuff that's actually going to be most life changing with AI is stuff we're not seeing, like its use in automated warfare.
Of course, yeah.
But I was just looking at the stats of how much BAE Systems and arms manufacturing contributes to the British economy. Billions and billions. It's like one of Britain's major industries, provides thousands of jobs, a huge source of revenue. No one ever asked us, like, is this what you want? Is this what you want your economy to be based on? Drones that kill children in Africa and the Middle East. And I think AI is another of those things. It's like
No one asked. Yeah.
people who see the potential for profit for themselves and a small group of shareholders who lobby government, fund political campaigns, and as a result are able to transform all our lives without any input, without any accountability, without any vote in favor of it from any of us. And so we don't get a choice. We've never had a choice. And this is one thing I wish was more centered in our conversations about democracy, because I get frustrated with the political discourse when we're arguing about political parties and their manifestos and their policies, knowing that the things that are probably going to have the biggest impact on our lives are not even on the table.
Yeah.
They're not up for discussion. They're not revealed publicly. They're not disclosed. They're happening behind closed doors. And there is such continuity in those. There's continuity in the people who run these companies, because they tend to be white men who are rich from certain demographic backgrounds. And they are just streaming up more and more of the texture of our lives, as well as the outcomes of people we care about. So it's really I just Like we've never had access to that information, but we need to, the very, very, very least, at the very least, we need to be aware that it's happening.
Absolutely, and aware of what it's doing. People always talk about the dynamic nature of new technology, but I always ask this question: at what cost? Always, at what cost? And I think capitalism has been looked at in a really different way. If I look at my reach online and the amount of regular people that are asking questions about even Christmas that's coming up, about Black Friday that just happened, about what do we need these things, and why has it become part of habit to behave in this way? And it's really, that's why I have a bit of hope, because people are going on a journey that they weren't on even sometimes a year ago.
Yeah, there's more discourse around what's toxic about Black Friday this year than I have ever seen in
Mhm.
previous years, which is a small but hopeful sign.
It's
Did you
good.
do Black Friday shopping, Mister?
Me care. I have holes in most of my clothes. My
But
wife
what
has
about
to beg
your
me.
do you celebrate Christmas? What about your Christmas shopping?
Something. Christmas is a tricky time for me. I've never been a Christmas. I'm a Grinch in many ways, but
Mm,
the cult like programming of our children is
yeah.
just mad, and I'm doing my best to have take them out of that when I can. And listen, from the pagan civilizations and many of the genocided First Nation worlds, this time of year and multiple seasons has always been celebrated, whether it's about the winter solstice or
I
harvest.
mean, Christmas is a deeply
Yeah,
pagan celebration at its heart,
but
like a lot of Christian rituals, but like the idea is that that's erased and it's
it's gone. It's
appropriated
gone.
for something else.
It's become
For
something.
anyone watching who doesn't have small school-age children or doesn't live in the UK, it is so intense. At this time of year, your children are basically in a program of intensive brainwashing, where from the age of about 3, they're cast in nativity plays, and then it's all about who gets to be Joseph and Mary.
In
These
Palestine that is
shepherds.
being erased.
There's usually no mention of the fact these are Palestinian refugees whose humanity we're centering. That's not the idea. Then they are indoctrinated with the consumerism of it, the secret Santas, the wish lists. There's the general consumption, just like how much sugar can you feed this child at this time of year? It's
It's
really interesting because there's no way if you sat down and looked at it on paper, any of it would make sense.
no.
But speaking for myself, I was also raised in this cult. And so you find yourself kind of perpetuating it. My partner, his son, is exactly like you. In fact, I've been calling him Grinch. He literally said, he's never been an enthusiast, but this year he said, Christmas is cancelled. He actually said Thanksgiving and Christmas are cancelled, but we don't celebrate Thanksgiving, so
I mean, that's just a straight up
that's not the thing. That's
genocidal
not
celebration.
that genocide holiday is not my problem, but
Man,
Christmas is definitely my problem. And like full disclosure, I'm very emotionally attached because it's nostalgia for my childhood, the tree. In fact, we're about to decorate the tree.
yeah,
The carols. I
yeah,
love mulled wine. I
yeah, yeah,
like being cozy. It also merges with like what your body authentically wants, which is to
yeah.
be cozy and hibernate because it's
Mm.
cold and it's dark. And those very natural needs have been appropriated by the capitalism of it. Like you need this scented candle on your Christmas list because it's going to help you with your wellness this hibernation season. They're all completely
Eat well with your
inextricably
family.
linked.
Spend time with your children. Eat well with your family.
Oh
Celebrate.
yeah, Julie Collishaw. Yeah, also the be good or else. Yeah, we emotionally blackmail our children with lies. Like
Mm.
if you don't behave well, Santa's not going to come down the chimney. And then you think, like, what are you? You are first of all lying to your child, endorsing this complete, and it's not even a good lie. If you're going to lie, like be a good liar. None, like most of us don't live in houses with chimneys anymore. It's not going to make sense. You don't have to be that much of a genius as a child to start asking questions about the number of houses that Santa and his helpers get round on one night. And then you take this like absurdity and then you use it to blackmail your child into behaving in ways that probably also conform with what's socially expected rather than necessarily
Mhm.
what they necessarily need. Like it's a mess. It's really a mess.
And then school. I mean, school goes nuts. I mean,
And then
so even if you try and simmer it at home, school just
this is
undoes
actually
it.
where I really get angry. As a working parent, the assumption is that you have endless available time in the middle of the day and the middle of the week to show up at your child's school and watch said performative displays of consumerist capitalist festivalization. It's so insane. I'm not a fan of that. some of us have jobs and
I
some
had a
of us
parent.
have things to do.
I had a parent last year because they had a big Bethlehem sign at the Nativity, and I said, you do realize where Bethlehem is, and you do understand what's happening in Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and the rest of the occupied territories. And he goes, no, 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 Miss Anne, the Nativity is a very British tradition. I was like, eh?
You know what?
Mary
We
and
need to be
Joseph.
a fly on the wall at your school gate, Miss Anne, because
Wait.
I want to see you
The
have those
birth of Christ
conversations.
is a British tradition. And he looked at me because it's a very British tradition. I was like, we're fucked.
Well, yeah, maybe we need to, you know what? Maybe we're missing an opportunity with this Christmas thing. Look, Christmas is fundamentally about recognizing the human rights of Palestinians,
Mm-hmm.
welcoming asylum seekers from Africa and the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
and protecting, above all, the sacred nature of life, of children, of vulnerable, marginalized people who are
Gosh.
forced from their homes.
I
That, as we've described it, is a festival I could get behind.
heads at GB News are exploding at this very moment at your statement. Oh boy.
Oh, all right. So, the other thing I want to talk about, kind of related, is Nigel Farage,
Mm.
because you brought GB News into the chat, Miss Anne. This was the week where, well, there were two dynamics to what happened, both of which one is not surprising and one is more surprising. The one that's not surprising is it was revealed, breaking news, that Nigel Farage is racist. Who knew? He went to Dulwich College, an extremely elite boarding school, private school. It's actually very popular among Ghanaians. I know off the top of my head, I think 5 or maybe 6 Ghanaians who went to Dulwich College and boarded from quite a young age. Um, and I think any of us who are kind of in that world of like being Black in predominantly white schools knows the drill. There's lots about it that is very traumatizing. It takes you a long time to unpick the kind of racialization and the othering and the some like from the microaggressions to the like overt racism of it, the whole spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
We've both talked and written about it in our own personal lives. Farage was the problem. So for the Black and brown and Jewish kids at Dulwich, he was the one deeply familiar and very comfortable with the racist slurs. He was
Ferociously anti-Semitic.
casually saying things that I can't repeat here because they're so offensive. So, on one level, that's not surprising, but it's also important to just acknowledge that. And, as always, when I hear those stories, I'm not interested in Farage. I'm interested in who were those Black, brown, and Jewish children, and like how have they metabolized that trauma, and how has that affected them through their lives? How have they carried that? How has it shaped them? How have they responded to it? Have they managed to process and cope with it? Anyway, that's not what the media is only interested in Farage. And this is the more surprising bit of it. Interested in being an apologist for Farage. So we've got The Spectator, which has basically become like a mouthpiece for the far right, saying it was just playground banter, like jog along. But more surprisingly, the Jewish Chronicle writing in an op-ed that this was fine. That actually
Crazy.
anti-Semitic bullying of Jewish children by somebody who could viably become the prime minister is not a problem. It's a distraction. It's completely okay. We need to focus on what the Jewish Chronicle described as a darker threat, by which I can only understand they mean Muslims or immigrants from Muslim countries, which they feel Farage is going to send back home in violation of international law.
Make it make
sense. That's more important. And it reminded me actually of when in the US, the Anti-Defamation League, which is supposed to be an organization that campaigns against anti-Semitism, was very quick off the mark to defend Elon Musk for using actual Nazi salutes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just one of those moments where, in a way, part of me was relieved because, again, an organization that has just strayed so far from its supposed mission of being a voice against anti-Semitism and has begun being apologists for racism and anti-Semitism and real voices of hatred. But when they reveal themselves like that, it almost, at least now, like we can see what it is clearly. Everybody can see that this is not any longer anything to do with protecting anti-Semitism, and instead it's become a vehicle for something else. So the Jewish Chronicle has been on a long and tragic decline from a really important voice for the Jewish community in Britain, a
What happened to
respected
it? I'm just
publication.
confused. Like, it's I don't see how this is protecting the Jewish community to have.
And neither, by the way, do many of its most prominent columnists who resigned en masse last year, I think it was, in protest at the editorial direction that the paper has taken. Its ownership has been shrouded in mystery. There's complete lack of transparency. And it's basically become a vehicle for supporting the far right. And the fact that the far right are the faction of our society that have a long storied history of anti-Semitism has
It's
become an inconvenience that they are
make
trying
it
to
make
they are
sense.
trying to like sweep under the carpet.
How does the Jewish Chronicle have a headline and an article saying that Farage's extremely anti-Semitic, horrific, and Peter Ezegui, has backed this? Real humans have said it happened. This isn't just hearsay. And saying
Oh
that we,
yeah, no, Nigel Farage's accusers are credible people who've gone on to have successful lives and achieve prominence in society. You can't write this off as some kind of smear campaign. My only question is why it's taken so long for it to come out fully and on the public record how much of a racist bully Nigel
yeah.
Farage was at school, because there have been rumours of it for years.
Yeah, well, Led by
None of it.
Donkeys did an amazing thing 2 years ago. That is just it's a beautifully edited and well done, and well detailed, and from school reports to it's he is bad news in so many ways, and the fact that he has been on, and we don't even talk about the great work Carol Cadwalader has done on him on being a Russian asset, and how long he was on Russia Today, right? And we can just
And
go on.
actually, we haven't talked about the fact that one of his associates was imprisoned
Yes.
last week for literally taking money from Putin. So it's not
Ah,
subtle.
it's and yet he is on questions. I can't remember how many times he's been on primetime BBC shows that are watched by half the nation, but it's been incredible how much this man has been platformed. And of course, it sounds silly when I bring up "I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here," but that was a huge moment for him, because
Oh,
that
I'd
was
forgotten that he was
that.
on
Yeah,
it. Is
that
that
well, that
is
was
that how
the
he came back into
yeah,
respect?
that was the industrial scale normalization of the racist, right? Because, whether or not we like that show, Anton Deck and the Nation is part of, it is what it is. And we now have a place where there's so many headlines saying he will be the next prime minister. And if we look at the political ownership of our papers, whether it's Lord Rothermere, the Barclay brothers, and of course the Murdoch empire, look at how many headlines that have been positive, not on the fence, not make your own mind up, but positive about Nigel Farage and reform. And you realize that the British media landscape is one of the most morally bankrupt that exists on this planet.
But you can explain so much of what's happened to us in recent years by media ownership. Back to our first conversation. Brexit wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the Murdoch press. There's no way. Our media are majority owned by rich people who
Five
are
guys.
deeply invested in right wing ideas. They are anti internationalist, they're anti human rights, they're anti equality, anti racial justice. And surprise, surprise, look how this has played out in the political landscape. Now, almost all of our parties are competing over who can sound the most right wing, including the Labour Party.
Yeah.
Uh,
And we will do another whole episode, I think, on how we have never had more black and brown people in positions of power, and almost all of them, from a UK perspective, are the black and brown faces of white supremacy. And that's a whole other conversation that, I know it's painful, Afua, because you and I have had for years now. We've been literally going nuts over this, but it's something that we will talk about in the future. But going back to the Jewish Chronicle, there's another headline that honestly has haunted me since I saw it. And it was written by, a very senior member of the political establishment in this country, Michael Gove. And he wrote an article, and the headline went, and I may be paraphrasing a bit, but that he believed that the IDF should be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And I was so shocked by this. I was shocked that it went past all the checks and balances to be a headline of any newspaper, because by then we were well into a year of, well past any proportional response to October 7th and into a place of just war crime after war crime after war crime. And you have a senior member, uh, former leadership member of the Tory party saying that they should be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. It's just crazy. It's crazy to me. And this is where we are at, and no one seems to bat an eyelid, which is why the mistrust in our media has gone to a place where, people are looking for answers in the wrong places. People can end up, eating rage bait and going down rabbit holes that are not useful for them. I want the BBC to exist, but not if it's been co-opted to the point where, people like Ben DePere can't even have his film be shown on the BBC.
I
What's
think we
happened?
should carve out a special place for the
Yeah.
Spectator and not exonerating the BBC at all, because I remember when the Spectator it was kind of centre-right. It was like the Times. It was, it didn't reflect my views, but it was like part of the landscape of a plurality of ideas that I would engage with. And at some point, it became so far gone. I mean, we already mentioned that Melanie Phillips is regularly platformed there.
Yes.
Douglas Murray, who's
Yeah,
written
yeah,
books basically about how much he hates Muslims,
yeah.
is, I think, like a deputy editor, or, he's a senior figure there. He regularly has a column. Michael Gove has become
But
an
this is the
apologist for
JC,
genocide.
just so we're clear.
Oh, the JC. But Michael Gove is he not the editor of The Spectator?
Yeah, he is. I think editor-in-chief. Yeah.
Uh, right. And I remember, this is actually random what really made it land for me, because I was watching this and I would regularly just be like, how are they publishing this? And then I think it was in Austria that the far right party, who are actually a neo-Nazi party, won an election, and it was kind of triggering shockwaves across Europe. Like, even the right in Europe were really worried that these actual neo-Nazis had won an election. And the Spectator basically wrote a piece in praise of this party and saying how great it was, and that, this kind of like faux moral panic was performative because really this is what Europe needs. And I remember being like, oh, this is who they are now. Anyway, I don't know why I was a bit slow. It took me a while to realize, but this is not like a normal situation. And it is emblematic of what's happened in Britain. Again, the Times, also not my newspaper, not my views, but it used to kind of make sense as people who were centrist would read it. And now, again, some of the things the Times have published are so
No, the
out
Times
there. And
is
the Times, by the way, is the paper of record.
Yeah.
What is in the Times is considered the first draft of history that will be in the vault, that the future generations will look at to try and work out what we're thinking. And I always have to tell my story about the Times, because this is where it was dead to me when my book British came out. And the Times reviewed it, as was at the time very common, like major publishers to send their books to all of the major newspapers. And the Times reviewed my book saying that I should be more grateful to be in the country. And also, I smoked a lot of weed.
Oh my God.
And I remember asking my literary editor to, is that some kind of literary phrase? I don't, is that like a weird phrase for analyzing writing that I don't know? And he was like, no, they just think you smoke a lot of weed. So I went back and I checked, Miss Anne. Do you know how many references to weed there are in my book?
No.
Zero.
Yeah. But you're black.
I don't smoke weed. And also, if I did, it's not in my book. So anyway, I don't know how, that was 2018. They could just say, oh, she just looks like someone who smokes weed. Think it, write it, put it in the review. And then the sub-editors and the lawyers and the editors all thought that was a totally fine thing to publish. At that point, I was like, okay, we're not even pretending that this isn't racism. And
it's unfiltered racism. The minute I realized that the Times empire was just gone off piece completely was, and I'm Googling it, because even as I'm about to say it, it sounds so crazy that maybe, I have to check I wasn't dreaming, but I'm quite sure, I'm going to Google it, that a guest came onto Times Radio when Prince Harry's book was out, Spare. And he compared Spare to a certain book by a certain Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf. And I was just like, yeah. And I was like, what? You know, and it was, yeah, remember the British media was such a frenzy over that book at the time, but it was
Wow.
compared to Mein
God,
Kampf. And
I also I think I'm unshockable, but that's actually got me.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, Prince Harry's book spare compared to reading Mein Kampf. Yeah, wow.
I'm actually speechless.
Yeah, no, no, no. It's I mean, it was wow. I'll send it to you. Yeah, the British press has lost its mind. It's lost its third mind. Times Radio. It's actually, yeah. It's like reading Mein Kampf in that Hitler thinks he's a great hero, and you put the book down with absolute disgust. This is
Uh,
in response to Harry's book.
Harry and Meghan have this ability to draw out the maggots and reveal so clearly who they are and how they think. It's really interesting because the way that people lost it completely and still do and reveal like their deepest darkness, their deepest like hatred and loathing and resentment and bitterness
It's good old
over
fashioned
like two
racism.
people trying to live their lives. It's fascinating to me. I found it really I've learned a lot about this country and the layer beneath what people usually show until they are so emotional it gets stripped back
Yeah,
and they
yeah,
reveal it clearly.
yeah, and a lot of my middle class or posh or wealthy private school friends are very aligned to Sunday Times Sunday roasts in my day with my friends, and many of those people have gone towards reform really quite swiftly. Many of
Wow.
those people were the people that I've been telling them about Gaza for 2 years, and the only time I saw them protesting, and I'm not joking here, was for the fox hunting ban. They actually came to London
Are
for
people
that.
still protesting over that?
Oh,
Wow.
some of my friends are.
And
Yeah.
Sam, why I can't think why that's not in your film. You failed to film any fox hunting protests and shoot the people. You
Yeah.
really missed you really missed a social movement there.
Yeah, yeah, I know. But it's important because
And
those
so, just for
people,
clarity, they're protesting in favor of fox hunting because I
of
know that a
course.
lot of animal rights people are like, this is a movement, and I feel them because it's
No,
in the
they're not
name.
with the animal rights people, right? And what's painful about this group of people, they're the same people I see in members clubs that I go to, who are literally on the first name basis with the last three prime ministers of England. They're the same people that could really have a real difference by saying, listen, mate, this is wrong. Do better. We are complicit. These are the people that smoke cigars and drink whiskey with these men, and they are all drinking this, this incredible kind of neo-colonial Kool-Aid and this is why Brexit happened, right? Where, we are this island that thinks it's still the empire that the sun doesn't set on. It's wild to me that that's the identity that people want to cling on to.
Ah.
But hope lives. Hope lives in the communities. As a protest photographer, the people that I'm meeting, the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that I've had the great privilege of seeing that are trying to force change, whether it's about genocides, whether it's about climate action, whether it's about the ecocides that's happening through the machinery of war, or whether it's about, free school meals, right? And the NHS or Black women getting some kind of equitable health care when they're having babies. Like, there are voices, and they're not getting smaller, they're I keep talking about how my voice, it's interesting, I always had some kind of reach, but it's kind of exploded in the last 2 years. I don't think it's because my imagery has improved exponentially. I think my images are what they are. I think people come to me through the picture and they stay because they don't feel gaslit. They're hearing someone, and there's nothing. And my sister, you and I have discussed this. There's nothing I say that is radical. There's nothing. I'm not some fringe kind of flat earther, right? I kind of just want babies to live, right? And
Yeah.
we should recognize climate care, and people should be able to love each other, and black and brown folks, are humans. That ain't fringe.
Wow. Yeah, when you put it like that, the idea that anything is radical that we're saying is such a symptom of the problem. Okay, I just want to finish with this
Okay.
headline.
Yeah.
Do you think Black people, given that everything we've just been saying about the far right and the normalization of the extreme and the way that just to like care about humanity is seen as so radical. Do you think that Black British people are leaving the UK or considering leaving the country? Thinking also about the prospect of a Farage prime minister and the direction in which it could go, arguably even worse. Because I wrote a piece on, actually not my Substack, I guest wrote it on Sam Bright's Substack. Check it out, Write Sprites, and he guest wrote a piece on my Substack about the racism, the school era racism of Nigel Farage and why it must not be swept under the carpet. I wrote a piece about how we are facing a black exodus from Britain. And it was just been so interesting, the response. I have had so many messages, some of them from ordinary people, some of them from really big names, celebrities that you've all heard of saying, oh my God, thank you for writing this. I'm actively looking into leaving for this reason. Or my friends and my family are, we want to move to a Caribbean nation. We want to move to an African nation. We want to move to Portugal. They are all looking for a destination where they feel that race is not going to oppress them in the visceral nature that they are beginning to feel day upon day. It's becoming worse in the UK. And I'm not saying, by the way, that it's problem free because last week we were also talking about returnees and how, there is a reality that we can sometimes go to other countries looking for respite from racism and then start creating new problems of social hierarchy and gentrification, pricing people out of properties and so on. But just thinking about the from a Black British perspective, does this Black Exodus sound real to you? Have you seen it? Do you think it could happen?
I haven't seen the data points, but I've definitely felt it more than seen it, and the feeling is the shell shock in communities that thought we've got rid of these Tories, and then they have been just shell shocked by a Labour whose policies are unrecognizable to them. And all whilst that's happening, the surge of the far right all over the world, from Trump's White House through many parts of Europe, and of course to reform. And I think if Farage did become the next prime minister, it would be a seismic change and an exodus of brown and black people in a way that hasn't been seen in modern England. That's for sure.
Okay, I am going to give you, because you said you didn't have the data points. This is what I have. And of course, like, YouGov is not polling this, right? But a survey last year by Word on the Curb found that 1 in 7 young British people of Black and Asian heritage are not only considering, but making concrete plans to leave the UK. And if you broaden that out to the number of people in that demographic group, like actually just thinking about it as well as making concrete plans, 51%. 51%, more than half. And The Voice, in its Black British Voices project, where they surveyed 10,000 Black British people, I think it's the largest survey of contemporary Black British voices that's ever taken place, found that when they asked Black British people if they regarded Britain as their permanent home, a place where they felt safe and could see themselves in the long term, 39% said no. So
not surprised. There's nothing surprising.
Those are real numbers. People saying, like, I'm not settled here, even though I was born here. My parents may have been born here. I'm British. It's not a question of citizenship. It's a question of belonging. And it's a question of continuing to feel othered, to feel threatened, not just like psychologically and in terms of identity and heritage, but even physically. The idea of, I think, a Farage presidency, Freudian slip, Farage as prime minister, I think, converts that into something like more muscular and physically threatening, because of course we've heard him and his allies talk about the forced removal of people who are British. It's not just a question of newly arrived immigrants or migrants anymore. So it would kind of be weird if that wasn't a consequence, that people are actually thinking about leaving. But I just thought, I wrote it because I'm like you, feeling it and hearing those conversations and seeing people who've already left. But the response to my piece has really made me realize how real it is.
It's real. It has to be. The stakes are high right now, and we're going through a time that feels like we're living history in a way that I wouldn't have said even 5 years ago. And the late stage capitalist sort of nightmare that we're in is also really, really interesting, because what the other side of it is that the world is looking more like a diverse pool of humans, and it's only going in that direction, whether the racists like it or not.
Okay, so Shirin Sadeghi, I hope I pronounced that right, on our chat has said there isn't an exodus giving them what they want. So I think that goes to the root of what you've just said, Misan. It's really interesting because I don't care what they want.
Yeah, and I think actually, if you know what they want is a world that no one will be happy in. Actually, and if you look at how we, when I say we, I think the children of empire shape film, music, culture, the zeitgeist of the world, not just the UK. That's not going away anytime soon. It's interesting because you know, if you look at the last 2 years and how people have kind of woken up to the fact that maybe America isn't the good guy, they're also waking up to the fact that, you know, the programming of the Britain that they're supposed to love is not necessarily the Britain that is going to be the future of our lives. If you look at London, you go to many parts of London, you've got every kind of person there. I saw a ridiculous YouTuber, Kurt Katz, walking down Oxford Street trying to pretend that it was some sort of war zone, right? Because there is this right-wing story that Britain is an Islamist nation that you can't, and the internet destroyed him. And what I loved about it is that the whole internet destroyed him. People from all walks of life saying this, you're embarrassing yourself. Like a granny tells him off in the video, he sees a fire engine and he pretends that, we're about to be flattened by something. Listen, Britain has always been the great soup of life. And I think the powerful few are telling us that we need to sit on islands of rage, which is why I am not leaving, because I believe I am a central part of what this country must be and should be, and which is a human
Oh, that's
being.
interesting. So you feel a kind of loyalty to Britain that you should stay here and make
No,
it
I
right?
feel a loyalty to my own humanity. And I believe my own humanity is representative of what this country must be.
What if your humanity is calling you to join your ancestral land in its struggles to overthrow this system of neo-colonial domination that Britain is perpetuating?
Well, I think the machinery of resistance, and if you haven't seen Andor season 2, you should. There are many people that have many roles between the mechanism of breaking down this system from the inside, from direct action, from books, from pens, from voices. And I think my path needs to cause wahala, as we say in Nigeria, inside this country.
I feel like you can rest easy that you're well on your way, Mr. The wahala is being caused.
And, look, we've gone over an hour, but it's interesting because obviously I went to the BIFA Awards and I did a whole video that's gone completely viral about everyone, and I won't name anyone, but lots of powerful people saying how much they've loved my voice. And Annie Lennox, my dear Annie Lennox, did a comment saying, Miss Anne, basically F them. They're celebrating your voice, you risking so much whilst they've been silent. This is Annie Lennox, right? Like a hero, and the comments extraordinary. And she's just like, no, what about them? And then, I didn't shoot the fashion awards this year, and I would say that the British Fashion Council has been so kind to me for the last 5 years. I've basically had free reign to shoot, and I have this extraordinary archive of black and white imagery, which you're in, Afua, alongside Rihanna and
you shot me and Kalechi last year, which
and
it's a treat.
It's a very special thing, and every year I publish it on Vogue, and I love it. But something
I didn't go this year. Did you go this year? It was okay. So we're recording this on Wednesday. It took place on Monday. This year, it just wasn't. It wasn't in me to do that red carpet and celebrate that life. And I'm not throwing shade at people who go and the outfits and the fashion. If you love fashion, and the storytelling and some of the storytelling was pretty dope this year, actually. Daniel Lismore was in Daniel.
I love Daniel. I love Daniel.
Incredible creative who wears this like medieval chainmail, and this time they had like a flag, an English flag with like refugees welcome. It was amazing. It was super cool.
I saw that.
So there was a lot of cool creative stuff happening, and I've been before, and it's like the most glamorous party of the year in the UK. About this year, I just, I think for me, the way I process those things, because they are weird, those, like hair and makeup, and it's not real. You kind of like everything is designed to turn you into a work of art for a night. And I usually kind of process that by like using it to shine a light on something I've written, book or a series or something that
Mm,
I believe in that I've been working on, that I kind of use it as a platform to like boost it because I want people to engage with my work. But
yeah.
I personally feel a bit weird when it becomes just me looking good
Mm.
on a red carpet for a night and like celebrating that I have access to this like starry glam celebby world. I don't know. Like everyone makes their own choices, and maybe people have felt critical of me in the past for going, and I'll probably go again. But this year,
Hey,
I
I'll
wasn't in
shoot
the
it
right
again.
place.
I will shoot it again at some point. But I need to have a point of view on why I'm doing things. And it's every December, and for me, Fashion Awards comes around at a time of year when I'm reflecting on my own journey. And if you look at the attendees, 70% are usually the same folks, and the 30% are how many A-listers they can get in, right? So it's quite an interesting kind of social experiment for me to look at the images, because I can see lots of my friends, our mutual friends, for the last 5 years that I've photographed. And, you know, I think we all need to ask ourselves, the world has changed into a world that none of us recognize in the last 5 years. Have we? Have we? Or are we still? Because that thing I always say about confirmation bias and arrested development, because I think none of us are in that state of nirvana like wisdom that we cannot grow, right? And I look back on when I first attended some of these events 5 years ago after shooting the Vogue cover to the Misan then and the Misan now, and I am a completely different person. And I'm very proud of what I've got, and there's a long way to go. But,
Do you feel critical of your earlier self, or do you feel like
no,
it's just the journey that
it's a
you
journey that
really
you're on.
enjoy?
I'm not here to judge anyone. I always say, I'm not here to judge your silence. I'm here to beg for your voice. There are lives to be
Mm.
saved. There are bridges to be built. If Beyonce tomorrow said free Congo, free Sudan, I will wear cowboy hat and go and no, because listen, I'm here to save lives and start a discourse of us understanding the mess that we're in. So I think a lot of the crowd that go to these parties, if they watch this, is to ask yourself, like, what is your, and I don't mean the cult of individualism, right? Not what have you managed to acquire in terms of clout, but your understanding of the world. Because I think when we are all on our deathbed, and may we all live long, we're not going to be thinking what we did at the Met or the Pink Ball or the Fashion Awards or the Oscars. We're going to be thinking on what did you leave in, what did you bring into this world that's made it a place where your children and children's children or people you care about can actually have a life worth living. Everything else is just noise.
Amen. Drop some truth on us, Miss Anne. Thank you. I feel like that's a nice, empowering note to leave people with.
Thank you all for listening, and we'll be back because the world's so crazy. There'll be plenty to talk about
We have
tomorrow,
a
the day
feeling there'll be
after.
more stuff to talk about. Yeah, yeah. See you next week, love.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.